This is not going to be a regular recipe video. You are going to be getting into recipes, but this is more about my thoughts about what went wrong with my chocolate cake recipe. I will be giving you a caramel sauce recipe and an espresso American buttercream, and again, some tips on how to make sure your chocolate cake still comes out good. A couple years ago, when I first wanted to develop a chocolate cake recipe for my home bakery, I could not find one. There was this YouTube creator and I loved her for the new cake recipe, and I tried her chocolate cake recipe and I didn't really like it. So again, doing a lot of tests, doing a lot of baking, it wasn't coming out good. I did not like the end product. But then one day I found out about the reverse creaming method, and when I first heard about it, I thought it was so wrong, because why would you put the fat into the flour and then add in the wet ingredients? That is so wrong. But I gave in. I finally did it. And I adjusted the chocolate cake recipe slightly by adding some oil, and I used the reverse creaming method. And when I tell you that cake came out beautiful, and my chocolate cake recipe, my chocolate cake in general, has been loved by people for years. So tell me why the other day I was baking the chocolate cake recipe again, and all of a sudden it's not coming out light, fluffy, delicious, decadent. It's coming out dense and raw. Even though I'm baking it to the correct temperature, when I insert a toothpick in the center, it's coming out clean, but yet still the batter is literally gummy. It is raw, it is dense, it is horrible. So I'm thinking the problem is me, but fortunately I never take the blame for anything. I decided I took a look at the 2 cocoa powders I use. So originally I was able to interchange between 2 different types of cocoa powder, and I was able to do that because sometimes one would be available, the other wouldn't, and there were great substitutes for each other. So one day, the only brand of cocoa I had, let's call it the orange brand. The orange brand was the only one I had, and I was wondering, what if it's the cocoa powder? So what I did was I went back to using Hershey's cocoa powder, which is the original cocoa powder I used. And when I tell you, this cake came out so good, it came out really, really nice, it came out better. But then for whatever reason, I decided that when I was filming this cake, I was going to add more flour to the batter. Tell me why I would do that. I have no idea. But that was another mistake I made. So the problem now is not Hershey's cocoa powder. The problem now is me. And I've realized I've been over mixing the batter. So with the reverse creaming method, you do have to mix the cake a bit longer compared to the creaming method, because that fat has now coated the flour. So it really inhibits the gluten formation. So I was trying to make up for that lack of gluten by mixing the batter, and as you can see, even though I sped up the clay, I was still over mixing the batter. So I do believe that was contributing to some of it being kind of raw and dense. And after slicing open this cake, I realized that the texture, the color was just off, and there were a few small raw spots in the cake that you'll see me take out now. So again, I think that's me over mixing the batter. But those are my thoughts on the chocolate cake and things I will avoid. I'll go back to my original cocoa powder. I will stop over mixing the batter, and maybe a few other things, but I will be sharing my thoughts on it on my other social media channels like Instagram and TikTok. But for right now, I'll show you how to make this caramel sauce. It will be linked in the description box. I start by heating the sugar over a medium flame, stirring it constantly even when it has lumps. Then when it has melted and it has gotten that beautiful amber color, I remove it from the heat and I pour in the cream. And as you can see, that cream was so thick and lumpy. The cream was not bad. The brand is just really, really thick. I tried it on 2 different occasions, 2 different sizes, and it was still so thick. But I still liked it in a sense. It was still really good, so don't judge the lumpiness. After adding in the cream and stirring it, I add the butter, and I like to whisk that together to make sure it's emulsified. Add in a bit of salt, and here is your beautiful caramel sauce. You can add it to a heat-proof dish or container. You can allow it to cool, cover it with plastic wrap, and allow it to cool at room temperature. For the coffee buttercream, I take some warm milk and I dissolve the instant coffee granules into that milk, and I set that aside to make sure everything is dissolved. Then I take my butter, and the butter is it's still cold and it's kind of firm, but soft enough to whip, but it's not greasy. And I like to whip that until it is light and pale, where you see the color change and the texture has changed as well. You can see that it is completely different, very pale, very light and fluffy. And if you compare it to what it looked like before and now, that is what you want when you're making American buttercream. To that light butter, I add half of my icing sugar, and with the mixer on low, I like to start mixing it in on low speed and make sure all of that icing sugar has been incorporated. And then I like to whip it on high for approximately 1 minute or a little bit longer, depending on how I feel whilst I'm whipping it. And I make sure that it's nice and light and fluffy. Again, I add in some vanilla, whip that in, and then I add the other half of my icing sugar. Again, on low speed, I use that to incorporate the icing sugar until it has disappeared. Then I whip that on high to ensure that I'm incorporating enough air into this buttercream, because again, we want it to be light and fluffy. And I don't sift my icing sugar either. I don't see a need to do it, because I whip it for so long, all of those lumps just dissolve. So after you whipped it, I add in some of my espresso mixture. There's a name for it, and it's not my espresso. I can't remember the name. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I can't remember what you call it. But then I add in some of that extra espresso mixture, a pinch of salt, because salt really brings this recipe together because it's so much sweetness. I add in some more of my espresso mixture. Again, the word is just losing me. I'm so sorry. I taste it. If it needs more, I add in a little bit more. And then when I'm finished whipping, I like to make sure I scrape the bowl down, because as you can see, there's still streaks of unmixed coffee. Whip it again, and then it is really nice and fluffy. It is a good recipe, but you can see there's so many air pockets and it still looks grainy. What I like to do is allow that icing sugar to hydrate in the fridge. So I cover it with plastic wrap, and I place it in the fridge until it is cold. So I put it in the fridge overnight, so mine got firm, but you want to put yours in the fridge until it gets cold again, where it almost starts to set. And I take it out the fridge, I whip it once again, and as you can see, that texture is completely different to what it was before. It looks way better, and that's what you want, a nice smooth buttercream. So let that icing sugar hydrate. To decorate this cake, I just add a bit of the caramel to the plate. I place one of the cake layers that has been leveled onto the plate, and I create a dam with the buttercream. Then in that dam, I add some of the caramel syrup. I am being really particular with the way I'm smoothing out that dam. You don't necessarily have to be that particular, but I wanted to make sure that none would leak out, and none leaked out. So I did a really good thing. So again, this entire video isn't necessarily supposed to be a tutorial video or a recipe video, really. It's just me sharing my thoughts, but I still want that if you want to recreate it on your own using any recipes that you have, you can feel free to do that. And a tip that I picked up over the years is, if you're stacking cakes like this, poke a few holes in the top to release any air that may be trapped between those layers, so that you don't get any bulging at the side of the cake. And with everything I did here, the dam I created, the way I smoothed out the dam, and the way I poked the holes in the top of the cake, I got no spillage, I got no leakage, and I got no bulging. With the excess buttercream from the bag I used to create the dam, I crumb coat the cake, which is just putting a light layer of buttercream on the cake to lock in those crumbs. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I am a perfectionist, and I just kept going around this cake constantly trying to smooth it out. But you don't have to be this particular, especially with the way we're going to decorate it. And again, I will be doing more videos on how to decorate cakes. Again, this video isn't really supposed to be a tutorial. It's more of a thought process and a little behind the scenes of how I created it. So I take this petal tip, a Wilton 103. It looks like, I cannot remember the number that was there, but it's right there on the camera, so feel free to look at it, pause it and look at it. I take that buttercream and I press it up against the bowl to get out as much of the air pockets and air bubbles as possible. I take some of it and I use my hand to create like a cupping shape for the bag to keep it open, and I press that buttercream into the bag. Once again, I just don't follow any rules. I put too much icing on the spatula, but in the end I got it inside of the bag without any issues. So to get any more air pockets out of that bag, I like to shake the bag, usually over the bowl of icing buttercream, just so that the gravity pushes it down and you get out all of those air pockets. I squeeze out a bit. And then after letting the cake chill in the fridge, I'm not sure if I mentioned that. I think I forgot to say that again. I place the cake in the fridge to chill. Make sure you place the fat side of the petal tip like closest to the cake, and then just do random squiggles. You want to keep your hand free. You want to just squeeze the bag and move your hand. That's how I get most of the natural swirls. When you try to control it too much, it doesn't come out right in my opinion, but this is what it looks like in the end. It's not a perfect design, but it is the design that I wanted. So again, like I said, this turned into a tutorial video, but that was not the original intention. The recipe for both the caramel sauce and the buttercream will be in the description, so you can feel free to make it. If you have any questions, make sure to leave it in the comment section. I'll be sure to get back to you. But I will be sharing my chocolate cake recipe in the future after some more tests, and I will be sharing the entire behind the scenes process of testing it over on my social media. That's something I want to do and something I really would love to fulfill and actually do. So I will be doing that on TikTok and social media, so make sure to search for Sugar Spice and Rose on the Instagram and sugarspiceandrose.co on TikTok. So if you have any questions, any tips and tricks, please leave them in the comment section. Thank you so much for being here. Please feel free to like and subscribe. Bye.